Captain Jake Morrison stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime, watching as alien species from across the galaxy talked about his people like they were not even there. The huge crystal chamber buzzed with voices, speaking in dozens of languages, all being turned into standard galactic speak by the translation devices everyone wore. Jake could hear every word they said about humans, and none of it was good. 3 years ago, humanity had joined the galactic community with hopes and dreams of partnership among the stars. They had offered their military might, their courage, and their willingness to fight for justice across the galaxy. The Council had been happy to take all of that and more. Human soldiers died on alien worlds protecting people they had never met. Human ships patrolled dangerous space lanes keeping trade routes safe. Human engineers built stations and colonies for species that barely said thank you. But when it came time to give humans a real voice in how the galaxy was run, the Council always had excuses. Humans were too young as a species, too violent, too unpredictable, too different from the older, wiser races that had been running things for thousands of years. Jake remembered the first time he had asked why humans could die for the Council but not vote in it. The Zephyrian representative had looked at him with those cold blue eyes and said that humans needed to prove themselves worthy first. That was 2 years and 8,000 dead human soldiers ago. Apparently, it still was not enough proof. Standing next to Jake was Ambassador Lisa Grant, the head of the human diplomatic mission. She had been fighting this battle with words, while Jake fought it with ships and soldiers. Both of them were tired. Both of them were angry. And both of them were starting to think the same thing, that maybe it was time to stop trying so hard to fit in where they were not wanted. The current debate was about the Kepler mining incident, where human forces had saved an entire colony from raiders who wanted to steal their rare metal deposits. The raiders had killed hundreds of civilians before the human fleet arrived. Captain Steve Parker had led his ships into a dangerous asteroid field to stop them, losing 3 vessels and 97 crew members in the process. The mining colony was saved, and the raiders were destroyed. Now the Council was arguing about whether Captain Parker had used too much force. The hegemony representative said humans were too quick to shoot first and ask questions later. The draconian speaker agreed, adding that humans showed a disturbing love of violence that made other species uncomfortable. Even the species whose colony had been saved were now saying that maybe the humans could have found a more peaceful solution. Jake felt his hands tighten into fists behind his back. These were the same aliens who had begged for human help when the raiders appeared. The same ones who had cried tears of joy when human ships arrived to save them. Now they were sitting in comfortable chairs in a safe building, talking about how violent humans were for saving their lives. The Zephyrian High. Speaker stood up, his tall, thin body casting shadows across the chamber floor. His voice was cold and superior as always. The human response to the Kepler situation shows exactly why this species is not ready for full membership in our council. They think with their weapons instead of their minds. They choose violence when wisdom would serve better. They are useful. As soldiers, yes, but soldiers are not leaders. They follow orders, they do not give them. Lisa Grant stepped forward to respond, but the High Speaker was not finished. Humans have served the Council adequately in their role as our military arm, but they must understand that being good at fighting does not make them qualified to help govern a peaceful galactic community. Perhaps in another century or two, when they have learned to control their aggressive nature, we can discuss this again. The chamber erupted in agreement from most of the alien representatives. A few voices spoke up for humanity, but they were quickly shouted down by the majority. Jake watched it all happen and felt something cold settle in his chest. These people would never see humans as equals. It did not matter how many times humans saved them or how many humans died for their causes. In their eyes, humans would always be the violent young species that was good for fighting but not much else. The vote was called, and Jake already knew how it would go. For the 3rd year in a row, humanity's application for full council membership was rejected. The final count was overwhelming. 37 votes against, only 8 in favor, with 5 abstentions. The message was clear. Humans were welcome to bleed and die for the council, but they were not welcome to have a say in running it. Jake looked at Lisa, and she looked back at him. No words passed between them, but they both knew what the other was thinking. This was enough. More than enough. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared on the holographic display from Earth, her face showing the same tired anger that Jake felt. She had been watching the entire proceeding from the human homeworld, and Jake could see in her eyes that she had reached the same conclusion he had. Jake stepped forward and cleared his throat. The chamber fell quiet as all eyes turned to him. For a moment, he considered giving them a speech about fairness and respect and everything humans had sacrificed for this ungrateful council. But what was the point? They had made their position clear, and words would not change anything. Instead, Jake kept his voice calm and professional. The human delegation thanks the council for their consideration of our application. We appreciate the time you have taken to review our request. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that ranged from smugly satisfied to mildly curious. However, we have decided that our current arrangement is no longer working for humanity. Effective immediately, all human military forces will be withdrawing from Council space and operations. We will be recalling our fleets, our personnel, and our support staff. The silence that followed was complete. Even the translation devices seemed to stop humming. Jake could see confusion and disbelief on alien faces throughout the chamber. The high speaker's blue skin turned an even paler shade. "Surely you cannot be serious," the high speaker said, his voice losing some of its usual authority. "Humans cannot survive in this galaxy without council protection and support. You are making an emotional decision that will harm your own species." Jake smiled, but it was not a warm expression. "Thank you for your concern, High Speaker. We will manage on our own from now on." He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. "We wish the Council the best of luck in all your future endeavors." As Jake and Lisa walked out of the chamber, they could hear the aliens behind them starting to argue among themselves. Some were saying good riddance to the violent humans. Others were beginning to realize what humanity's departure might mean for the galaxy's security. Jake did not look back to see their faces. He was already thinking about the future, and that future did not include begging for scraps of respect from people who would never give it freely. The news of humanity's withdrawal spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks to every corner of Council space. Most alien species reacted with disbelief, then anger, then a strange kind of panic as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. Humans were not making empty threats or trying to negotiate for better terms. They were actually leaving. Commander Alex Carter stood on the command deck of Kepler Station, humanity's largest research facility in Council space, watching as his people worked with calm efficiency to pack up 3 years of their lives. Scientists carefully sealed their research data into secure containers. Engineers dismantled equipment that had taken months to build. Military personnel erased every trace of human technology from the station's computer systems, making sure that nothing useful would be left behind for their former allies. The speed of the operation impressed even Alex, and he had been planning for this possibility for months. Every human facility in Council space had emergency evacuation protocols that could be activated at a moment's notice. What had seemed like paranoid preparation now looked like brilliant foresight. Within hours of Captain Morrison's announcement, human ships were already moving toward evacuation points. "Sir, the Draconian observers are asking to speak with you," reported Lieutenant Ben Hughes, his communications officer. The young man looked tired but determined, like everyone else involved in the massive withdrawal operation. "Tell them I am busy," Alex replied without looking up from his datapad, where he was checking off items on his evacuation list. If they want to talk, they can contact our diplomatic team back on Earth. Through the station's large viewing windows, Alex could see alien ships gathering in the distance. Some were council vessels trying to monitor the human withdrawal. Others belonged to species that had business arrangements with the humans and were probably wondering what would happen to their contracts. A few looked like they might be planning to move in and claim the station once the humans left. Dr. Emma Rodriguez approached Alex's position, carrying a small case that contained samples from her xenobiology research. She had been one of the few humans who genuinely enjoyed working with alien species, finding their different biologies fascinating rather than disturbing. Now she looked sad, but resolute about leaving. "The Draconians are offering to buy our research data," she said, setting down her case. "They say they will pay triple the standard rate for our biological studies." Alex looked at her with raised eyebrows. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that our research was not for sale at any price," Emma replied. "If they wanted access to human scientific work, they should have treated us as partners instead of hired muscle." That was the response Alex had hoped to hear. One of the most important parts of the withdrawal was making sure that humans took all their knowledge and technology with them. The Council had always assumed that human advances belonged to the galactic community as a whole, especially since humans had learned so much from alien science when they first joined. But humans had contributed plenty of their own innovations over the years, and those innovations were going home with their creators. The evacuation was not just about moving people and equipment. Human ships were also destroying or removing infrastructure that could be useful to the Council. Defense platforms that humans had built to protect trade routes were being dismantled or blown up. Communication relays that human engineers had installed were being wiped clean and shut down. Mining operations that humans had established were being abandoned after all useful equipment was removed. Some alien observers called this destructive and wasteful. Alex called it smart. Why should humans leave behind tools and weapons that could be used against them later? Why should they make it easy for the Council to replace human services with human-built infrastructure? The most dramatic part of the withdrawal was happening at the border stations, where human fleets had been patrolling the dangerous Outer Rim territories. Captain Steve Parker, who had become something of a hero to humans after his actions at Kepler Mining Colony, was leading one of the largest evacuations. His fleet of 40 ships was pulling back from a sector that had been peaceful for 2 years, thanks to their presence. "Control, this is Parker." His voice came through the communication system to Alex's station. "We are beginning final withdrawal from the Outer Rim. All human personnel and equipment are accounted for. Estimated time to clear Council space is 18 hours. Alex activated his microphone. "Understood, Parker. Safe travels." As Alex watched Parker's ships disappear into hyperspace, he wondered how long it would take for pirates and raiders to move into the territory they were abandoning. Probably not long. The Outer Rim had been a dangerous place before humans arrived, and it would be dangerous again once they left. Admiral Kate Sullivan's voice came through on a priority channel from Earth, addressing all human forces involved in the withdrawal. "All units, this is Admiral Sullivan. I want to commend everyone involved in Operation Exodus for your professionalism and efficiency. We are showing the galaxy that humans can be just as organized and disciplined in leaving as we were in serving. Continue following your evacuation protocols and remember that the whole galaxy is watching how we handle this transition." Alex smiled at the Admiral's choice of words. Operation Exodus had been the secret code name for humanity's withdrawal plan, developed over months of careful preparation. Most humans had never known such a plan existed, but military and civilian leaders had been quietly preparing for the possibility that their relationship with the Council might end badly. The plan was comprehensive and brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to negotiate or make demands, humans would simply remove themselves from the situation entirely. They would take their ships, their people, their technology, and their knowledge, and they would find somewhere else to build their civilization. The council could keep their opinions about human worthiness. Humans would keep everything else. What made the plan even more effective was how politely it was being executed. There were no angry speeches or dramatic gestures, no threats or ultimatums. Human forces were simply following orders to withdraw in an orderly fashion, treating their former allies with the same professional courtesy they had always shown. It was impossible for the council to claim that humans were being unreasonable or emotional when they were behaving so calmly and rationally. Dr. Emma Rodriguez returned to Alex's position with a concerned expression. The Zephyrian trade representative wants to know what will happen to their shipping contracts with human mining operations. Apparently, those contracts represent about 30% of their rare metal imports. Alex shrugged. Not our problem anymore. They can try to mine those asteroids themselves, or they can find another supplier. But some of those mining sites are in dangerous areas that only human ships could safely access, Emma pointed out. Then, I guess the Zephyrians should have thought about that before they spent so much time explaining why humans were not good enough to be full members of their club, Alex replied. As the hours passed, the scale of the human withdrawal became clear to observers throughout the galaxy. This was not a small group of angry diplomats making a gesture. This was an entire civilization packing up and moving out, taking with them everything they had built during their time in council space. 300 human worlds were recalling their defensive fleets. Hundreds of mining operations were shutting down. Thousands of human merchant ships were changing course for home. The council had expected humans to back down when they realized how much they would be giving up. Instead, humans were giving it up willingly, making it clear that they valued their dignity more than their comfort. It was a message that resonated across the galaxy, especially among younger species that had their own complaints about how the council treated them. Captain Morrison's final message to the council was broadcast on all frequencies as the last human ships prepared to leave council space. His words were simple and direct. We came to the stars seeking friendship and partnership. We found work and duty instead. Since friendship was not possible, we choose to seek our own path among the stars. We thank the Council for the lessons they have taught us about the galaxy, and we wish them well in their future endeavors. With that, the human communication networks went silent. 3 years of humanity's presence in the galactic community ended not with violence or drama, but with a quiet professionalism that somehow made the whole thing more powerful than any angry speech could have been. 6 months after the human withdrawal, the galaxy was learning that some silences are louder than screams. The Calorian Cluster, a group of mining worlds that had been protected by human patrol fleets for 2 years, fell to pirate attacks within 3 weeks of humanity's departure. The raiders came in overwhelming numbers, hitting multiple targets at once, stealing cargo and taking hostages with the confidence of predators who knew no one was coming to stop them. General Ryan Foster sat in his new office on New Terra, one of humanity's colony worlds in the Orion Arm, reading intelligence reports about the chaos spreading through council space. The humans had not gone far after leaving the galactic community. They had simply moved to a different part of the galaxy, one where they could build their own civilization without asking permission from anyone. The Draconian Trade Federation is requesting emergency military support, reported intelligence officer Chloe Barnes, a young woman who had been part of the human diplomatic corps before the withdrawal. Their mining operations in the Vega sector are being hit daily by raider fleets. They have lost 14 cargo ships in the past month. Ryan looked up from his reports with a slight smile. What is our response to their request? Standard diplomatic reply, sir. We express our sympathy for their situation and wish them the best of luck in resolving it, but we are no longer available to provide military assistance to council members. The irony was not lost on Ryan. 6 months ago, the Draconians had been among the loudest voices claiming that humans were too violent and aggressive to be trusted with real authority in the galaxy. Now they were desperately asking those same violent humans to come back and protect their merchant ships from the very pirates that human fleets had been keeping in check. The Council had made a fundamental mistake in their understanding of what humans brought to the galactic community. They had seen human military effectiveness as a simple service that could be easily replaced with their own forces or hired mercenaries. What they failed to understand was that human military success came from a combination of factors that could not be quickly replicated. Human soldiers fought harder because they believed in what they were protecting. Human commanders made better tactical decisions because they were trained to think independently rather than follow rigid protocols. Human fleets could respond faster to threats because they had a command structure that valued quick action over careful deliberation. Most importantly, human forces had been willing to take risks and make sacrifices that other species would not accept. Ambassador Lisa Grant, now serving as colonial secretary for the human settlements, reviewed immigration requests from aliens who wanted to leave Council space and join the human colonies. The requests were coming in faster than her office could process them, and most of them told similar stories. Alien citizens who had grown tired of the Council's bureaucracy and politics, who wanted to live in a society that valued merit over ancestry and action over endless debate. Scientist Velthera's asylum request has been approved, reported her aide, a former Council employee named Marcus Webb. She will be arriving on the next transport from the border zone. Lisa smiled at that news. Velthara had been one of the few aliens who had treated humans as equals during their time in Council space. The draconian scientist had always been curious about human research methods and had collaborated on several projects with human researchers. When the withdrawal happened, she had been one of the first to request permission to continue her work in human space. The fact that aliens were choosing to leave their own civilizations to join humanity was causing serious problems for the Council. It suggested that maybe humans had been right about the flaws in galactic society, and maybe the Council's treatment of humanity had been unfair. Some Council members were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why so many of their brightest citizens wanted to live under human government instead of their own. Meanwhile, the security situation in Council space continued to deteriorate. The hegemony, a militaristic alliance that had been contained by human forces for years, was beginning to expand into territories that were no longer protected. 3 minor worlds had already fallen to hegemony invasion fleets, and their forces were moving toward more valuable targets. Commander Alex Carter, now overseeing human expansion into unexplored sectors, received regular briefings about the growing chaos in Council space. The numbers painted a clear picture of a galactic community in decline. Trade routes that had been safe for years were now too dangerous for civilian ships. Piracy rates had increased by 400%. 3 separate wars had broken out in regions that had been peaceful during the human era. The Council is trying to recruit mercenary companies to replace our forces, reported Chief Analyst Ben Tucker, studying the latest intelligence data. So far, they have had limited success. Most mercenary groups are demanding payment rates that the Council cannot afford, and those that are willing to work for less are not effective enough to maintain security. Alex nodded, not surprised by this news. Mercenaries fought for money, not for ideals, and that made them less reliable than soldiers who believed in their cause. More importantly, mercenary companies were businesses that had to worry about profits and losses. They would not take the same risks that human forces had accepted as part of their duty. The Council was also discovering that humans had been quietly essential to the galaxy's economy in ways that went beyond military protection. Human mining operations had been extracting rare minerals from dangerous locations that other species could not safely access. Human shipping companies had been carrying cargo along routes that required the kind of aggressive navigation that made other species nervous. Human engineers had been maintaining critical infrastructure in hostile environments where alien workers refused to go. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, now heading the Colonial Research Division, made a discovery that explained Why the Council was having so much trouble replacing human services. The exotic materials that humans had been mining for the galactic community were not just valuable, they were essential for the most advanced spacefaring technologies. Faster-than-light communication systems, advanced weapons, high-efficiency engines, all of them required materials that were found primarily in asteroid fields and nebulae that only human ships had been brave enough to mine. Even more importantly, 90% of the known deposits of these materials had been in space. That was controlled or protected by human forces. When the humans left, they had not just taken their ships and soldiers. They had taken access to the resources that kept galactic civilization running at its current level of technology. The Council's attempts to access these resources with their own forces were failing badly. Alien ships that tried to mine in the dangerous asteroid fields where humans had worked were being destroyed by radiation, gravitational anomalies, and pirate attacks. The few successful mining operations were producing materials at a fraction of the rate that human operations had achieved. Within 6 months of the human withdrawal, the price of exotic materials had tripled on galactic markets. Some of the most advanced technologies were becoming too expensive for smaller worlds to afford. The Council's own fleet was having trouble maintaining its ships because replacement parts required materials that were no longer available at reasonable prices. General Ryan Foster read these reports with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because it proved that humans had been far more valuable to the galactic community than the Council had ever acknowledged. Sadness because the growing chaos was hurting innocent people who had nothing to do with the political decisions that led to humanity's departure. But Ryan also knew that humans could not solve the galaxy's problems by sacrificing themselves for people who did not respect them. The Council had made their choice when they decided that humans were good enough to die for galactic security, but not good enough to help make the decisions about how that security was maintained. Now they were learning the consequences of that choice. The human colonies were thriving in their independence. Free from Council oversight and regulations, human scientists and engineers were making breakthroughs at an incredible pace. New ship, designs that were faster and more efficient than anything in Council space. Advanced weapons that gave human forces a significant technological advantage. Revolutionary terraforming techniques that could turn hostile worlds into gardens in a fraction of the time required by traditional methods. Most importantly, humans were discovering that they did not need the Council's approval to be successful among the stars. They were building a civilization based on their own values, where merit mattered more than species membership, and where people were judged by their actions rather than their ancestry. It was the kind of society that many aliens were starting to envy, which explained why so many of them were asking to join it. 1 year after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, the galaxy was burning in ways that made the earlier problems look like minor inconveniences. The consortium of free traders, an economic alliance that had controlled galactic commerce for over a century, collapsed when their shipping lanes became death traps that no merchant ship could safely navigate. Without human patrol fleets holding the dangerous outer rim territories, raider fleets had grown from small gangs into organized armies that controlled entire star systems. Commander Alex Carter stood on the observation deck of the HCS Pioneer, watching as human survey teams mapped new star systems in the unexplored regions beyond Council space. The ship was one of dozens involved in humanity's expansion program, seeking out new worlds where human civilization could grow without interference from alien politics. The irony was not lost on Alex that humans were now exploring regions of space that the Council had always claimed were too dangerous for settlement. "Sir, we are receiving another priority transmission from Council space," reported Communications Officer Sarah Blake, a young woman who had been transferred from diplomatic service to exploration duty after the withdrawal. "The message is marked as urgent and is requesting immediate human assistance." Alex did not even look up from the star charts he was studying. "Standard response, Blake. We acknowledge receipt of their message and wish them success in resolving their difficulties. The messages from Council Space had been arriving daily for months, each one more desperate than the last. What had started as polite requests for human forces to return and help with minor security issues had evolved into frantic pleas for assistance against threats that were overwhelming the Council's ability to respond. Alex had stopped reading the details weeks ago. The pattern was always the same. Some crisis that human forces had been quietly preventing was now devastating Council territory. The most serious threat was something called the Void Swarm, a mysterious entity that had been contained in the Outer Rim regions by human forces for over 2 years. Nobody knew exactly what the swarm was. Some kind of artificial intelligence, alien life form, or perhaps something worse. What everyone knew was that it consumed everything in its path, turning entire star systems into dead zones where no life could survive. Human forces had discovered the swarm during a routine patrol mission and had immediately recognized it as an existential threat to galactic civilization. For 2 years, human fleets had maintained a careful containment around the infected systems, preventing the swarm from expanding while scientists studied ways to destroy it permanently. The work had been dangerous and expensive, costing hundreds of human lives and dozens of ships. But it had kept the galaxy safe. When the humans withdrew, they had included the Void Swarm containment fleets in their evacuation. The Council had been informed about the threat and provided with all human research data about potential countermeasures. What the Council had not been told was that maintaining the containment required a level of sacrifice and risk-taking that their own forces would never accept. Within 6 months of the human withdrawal, the Void Swarm had broken free of its containment zone and was expanding rapidly toward populated space. Council fleets that tried to engage the swarm were either destroyed or infected, adding their ships and crews to the growing threat. 3 star systems had already been completely consumed, and the swarm showed no signs of slowing down. General Ryan Foster reviewed the intelligence reports about the swarm's expansion with a heavy heart. He had been one of the commanders involved in the original containment effort, and he knew better than anyone how dangerous the entity was. Part of him wanted to send human forces back to help stop the threat before it could spread further. But a larger part of him knew that doing so would only validate the Council's belief that humans existed to solve problems that other species were unwilling or unable to handle. The projected timeline shows the swarm reaching the Centauri trade hub in approximately 4 months, reported intelligence analyst Marcus Stone, studying the data on his computer screen. If it takes that system, it will have access to the major hyperspace routes connecting the core worlds. Ryan nodded grimly. The Centauri trade hub was one of the most important commercial centers in Council space, and its loss would cripple the galactic economy. More importantly, the hyperspace routes that connected there would give the swarm rapid access to some of the most heavily populated systems in the galaxy. But Ryan also knew that stopping the swarm would require exactly the kind of costly, dangerous operation that the Council had always taken for granted when humans were doing it. Human forces would have to sacrifice ships and lives to contain an entity that threatened everyone while receiving no recognition or gratitude for their efforts. It was the same pattern that had led to humanity's withdrawal in the first place. Admiral, Kate Sullivan's voice came through on a secure communication channel from Earth, addressing the senior commanders of the human colonial forces. I know you are all aware of the deteriorating situation in Council space. I want to make it clear that our policy remains unchanged. We will not intervene in conflicts that do not directly threaten human colonies or shipping. The Council made their position on human worthiness very clear, and we must respect their decision to handle their own problems. The Admiral's words were diplomatic, but everyone understood the real message. Humans would not sacrifice themselves for people who had spent years explaining why humans were too primitive and violent to be treated as equals. If the Council wanted to handle galactic security without human help, they were welcome to try. The Ken Economic consequences of humanity's withdrawal were becoming clearer as trade data from the past year was analyzed. The loss of human mining operations had created shortages of critical materials that affected everything from starship construction to communication networks. The collapse of human shipping companies had disrupted cargo routes that other species had relied on for decades. Most importantly, the absence of human protection had made large areas of space too dangerous for normal commercial activity. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, working in her new laboratory on the human colony world of New Horizon, made a discovery that explained why the Council was having so much trouble adapting to humanity's absence. The exotic materials that humans had been mining were not just rare. They were essential for the quantum processors that controlled faster-than-light communication and navigation systems. Without a steady supply of these materials, the Council's ability to coordinate their response to galactic crises was breaking down. The communication delays between Council worlds are increasing every month, Emma reported to the Colonial Research Council. What used to be instantaneous quantum communications are now taking hours or days to get through. Their ability to coordinate fleet movements and share intelligence is deteriorating rapidly. This explained why the Council's response to threats, like the Void Swarm, had been so disorganized and ineffective. Military commanders who could not communicate with each other in real time could not coordinate the kind of complex operations needed to contain a rapidly expanding threat. The Council was learning that galactic civilization required more than just good intentions and ancient wisdom. It required the technological infrastructure that humans had been quietly maintaining for years. Meanwhile, human colonies were experiencing a golden age of technological advancement. Free from Council regulations that had limited their research into potentially dangerous technologies, human scientists were making breakthroughs that would have taken decades under the old system. New propulsion systems that could cross galactic distances in weeks instead of months. Advanced artificial intelligence that could manage complex systems more efficiently than any biological crew. Weapons and defenses that made human ships superior to anything in Council space. The stream of aliens requesting asylum in human space was becoming a flood as news of these advances spread throughout the galaxy. Scientists, engineers, merchants, and ordinary citizens were abandoning their homeworlds to join a civilization that valued innovation over tradition and merit over species membership. The brain drain was so severe that some Council worlds were implementing travel restrictions to prevent more of their citizens from leaving. Captain Steve Parker, now commanding a human exploration fleet in the far reaches of the galaxy, discovered something that changed everything. Deep space sensors detected massive structures in the void between galaxies, artificial constructs that appeared to be ancient beyond imagination. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not alone in choosing to leave the galactic community. Other species had done the same thing, building their own civilizations in the empty spaces where they could develop without interference. The discovery suggested that the Council's model of galactic civilization was not the only way to organize spacefaring species. Perhaps it was not even the best way. Perhaps humanity had not failed to measure up to galactic standards. Perhaps the standards themselves were flawed, designed to maintain the power of older species rather than promote the development of newer ones. As the Void Swarm continued its expansion toward the heart of Council space, and as more systems fell to raiders and invaders, 18 months after humanity walked away from the galactic community, the Galactic Council faced its first existential crisis in 3 centuries. The Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime, once filled with the confident voices of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, now echoed with desperate arguments and increasingly frantic proposals. The Void Swarm had consumed 7 star systems and was advancing toward the core worlds. The hegemony war machine controlled nearly a third of former Council territory. Piracy had increased to levels not seen since the ancient times before Galactic. Civilization was established. High Speaker Zarvex of the Zephyrians, the same alien leader who had delivered the final insult to humanity during their last membership application, now stood before his fellow council members with his pride in ruins. His tall, elegant frame seemed somehow diminished as he spoke words that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. "Fellow council members," he began, his voice lacking its usual authority, "we must acknowledge a truth that many of us have been reluctant to accept. The humans were not merely adequate soldiers or useful mercenaries. They were the foundation upon which our modern civilization rested, and we have been fools not to recognize this before it was too late." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembly. For a Zephyrian high speaker to publicly acknowledge error was unprecedented in council history, but the evidence of that error was impossible to ignore. Every day brought news of more disasters, more losses, more proof that the galaxy could not function without the services that humans had provided. The draconian representative stood up, her scaled features showing the stress that all council members were feeling. "The question is not whether we made mistakes in our treatment of humanity. The question is whether we can convince them to return and help us survive the consequences of those mistakes." That question had been dominating council discussions for months. Every major crisis that struck council space was followed by heated debates about whether to ask for human assistance. The problem was that every attempt at contact had been met with polite but firm refusals. Humans were willing to engage in limited trade with council species, but they showed no interest in returning to their old role as the galaxy's unpaid guardians. Admiral Kate Sullivan, now Fleet Admiral of the Human Colonial Navy, received the Council's formal diplomatic overture in her office on Earth. The message was unlike anything the Council had ever sent to humanity before. Gone was the condescending tone and superior attitude. In its place was something that sounded almost like begging. The Council was offering everything that humans had originally requested and much more. Full membership with voting rights equal to the founding species. Territorial concessions that would give humanity control over entire sectors of space. Technology-sharing agreements that would provide humans with access to the most advanced alien science. Most importantly, they were offering to formally recognize humans as a senior partner in galactic governance, rather than a junior member seeking approval. "What should our response be, Admiral?" asked her aide, a young officer who had been born, after humanity joined the galactic community and remembered what it was like to serve under alien oversight. Kate looked out at the bustling human shipyards visible through her office window, where vessels far more advanced than anything in Council space were being constructed at an incredible pace. "Thank them for their generous offer. Tell them we will give it careful consideration." She did not mention that careful consideration meant filing the message away and continuing with humanity's own plans for galactic expansion. The Council's offer might have been acceptable 2 years ago, when humans were still seeking acceptance from alien civilization. But humanity had moved beyond that need. They were building something new, something better, and they had no interest in returning to the old system that had treated them as expendable servants. The situation in Council space continued to deteriorate with each passing day. The Void Swarm had reached the Centauri trade hub and consumed it entirely, gaining access to the hyperspace routes that connected the core worlds. Panic was spreading through the most heavily populated systems as refugees fled ahead of the advancing threat. The Council's own fleets were proving utterly inadequate to contain something that human forces had held in check for years. Even worse, the hegemony war machine was taking advantage of the chaos to expand their territory even faster. Their invasion. Fleets were striking at worlds weakened by pirate raids and economic collapse, adding system after system to their growing empire. Some Council worlds were surrendering without a fight, rather than face destruction, calculating that hegemony rule might be preferable to the chaos that was consuming their neighbors. Commander Alex Carter, monitoring the situation from his command post in human space, watched the collapse with a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. The sadness came from knowing that innocent people were suffering because of political decisions they had no control over. The satisfaction came from seeing the council finally face the consequences of their arrogance and short-sightedness. The latest intelligence reports show hegemony forces advancing on the Andromedan cluster, reported his intelligence officer. If they take those systems, they will control the majority of the galaxy's antimatter production facilities. Alex nodded, making notes on his tactical display. The information was valuable for human strategic planning, but it was not his problem to solve. The Council had spent years explaining that humans were too primitive and violent to help govern galactic civilization. Now they could demonstrate their superior wisdom and peaceful nature by handling the crisis themselves. The economic collapse was accelerating as well. Without human mining operations providing exotic materials, the advanced technologies that galactic civilization depended on were becoming impossible to maintain. Communication networks were failing. Starship construction had slowed to a crawl. Even basic systems like life support and artificial gravity were becoming unreliable on older stations and ships as replacement parts became unavailable. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, analyzing the economic data from her research facility on New Horizon, made a discovery that explained the speed of the collapse. The galactic economy had been far more dependent on human contributions than anyone had realized. Humans had not just been providing military protection and exotic materials. They had been the primary innovators in dozens of critical technologies, the main source of skilled workers for dangerous jobs, and the backbone of the shipping industry that moved goods between star systems. The Council never understood that removing humans from their civilization was like removing a keystone from an arch, Emma reported to the Colonial Science Council. They thought they were getting rid of troublesome subordinates, but they were actually destroying the structural supports that held their entire society together. This analysis was being confirmed by events throughout Council space. Systems that had relied on human expertise for everything from asteroid mining to deep space exploration were finding themselves unable to maintain their operations. Worlds that had depended on human shipping companies for trade were becoming isolated as other species proved unwilling or unable to serve dangerous routes. Military units that had relied on human tactical support were suffering defeat after defeat against enemies that human forces had easily contained. The brain drain from Council space to human territory was reaching crisis levels. Some of the galaxy's best scientists, engineers, and administrators were abandoning their homeworlds to join human civilization. They were drawn not just by better opportunities, but by the chance to be part of a society that valued merit over ancestry and innovation over tradition. Scientist Vel Thara, who had been among the first aliens to request asylum in human space, sent regular reports back to her former colleagues about life in human territory. Her descriptions of human research facilities and technological capabilities were causing panic among Council leaders who were beginning to understand how far ahead human science had advanced during their isolation. Human ships are now capable of crossing galactic distances in a fraction of the time required by our fastest vessels, Velthera reported. Their weapons and defenses are generations ahead of anything in Council space. Most importantly, their society rewards innovation and risk-taking in ways that our rigid hierarchies never could. These reports were circulating throughout Council space, despite official attempts to suppress them. The message was clear. Humans had not just survived their departure from galactic civilization, they had thrived beyond anything the Council had thought possible. As the Void Swarm advanced toward the heart of Council territory and the hegemony continued its expansion, desperate voices in the Council Assembly began suggesting more extreme measures. Some proposed offering humans complete control over galactic military forces in exchange for their return. Others suggested territorial concessions that would effectively make humanity the dominant power in the galaxy. But even these desperate offers were met with polite refusals from human diplomats. The message was consistent. Humanity had moved beyond its old relationship with the Council and had no interest in returning to a system that had never respected their contributions. 3 years after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, the galaxy had been transformed into something that the old order could never have imagined. The great civilization that had ruled the stars for millennia had fractured into scattered remnants, struggling to survive in a universe that no longer recognized their authority. In its place, a new power was rising from the regions of space that the Council had once dismissed as too dangerous or primitive for proper development. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the HCS Liberty, the flagship of humanity's northern fleet, watching as his ships patrolled the borders of human space. Beyond those borders lay a galaxy in chaos, where the void swarm continued its relentless advance and the hegemony war machine carved out an empire from the ruins of Council civilization. But within human territory, peace and prosperity flourished, as never before. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What had started as a desperate exodus from Council space had become the foundation for something unprecedented in galactic history. Human colonies were thriving beyond anything their founders had dared to hope. New worlds were being terraformed at an incredible pace, using techniques that surpassed anything the Council had achieved. Technologies that had been theoretical concepts, just 3 years ago, were now being mass-produced in human factories. "Admiral, we are receiving a distress call from a Council medical transport," reported Communications Officer Lisa Park. "They are requesting emergency sanctuary. The ship is carrying refugees from the Arcturus system, which fell to the void swarm yesterday." Jake considered the request carefully. The ship would be carrying civilians who had lost everything when their world was consumed by an entity that human forces had once kept contained. These were not the political leaders who had insulted humanity, or the military commanders who had dismissed human contributions. These were ordinary people, whose only crime was living under a government that had made catastrophically bad decisions. Grant them sanctuary, Jake decided. Direct them to Processing Station 7 for medical screening and refugee intake. This had become the standard human response to the refugee crisis that was overwhelming the remnants of Council space. Humans would help civilians in need, regardless of their species or former political affiliations, but they could not, return to their old role as the galaxy's unpaid guardians. That distinction was important, and it sent a clear message about the kind of civilization humanity was building. The refugee processing stations were among humanity's most impressive achievements. Built in the border regions between human space and the chaos beyond, these facilities could handle thousands of displaced persons per day, providing medical care, temporary housing, and integration services for those who qualified for permanent settlement. The efficiency and compassion of these operations stood in stark contrast to the Council's historical treatment of refugees, which had typically involved years of bureaucratic delays and arbitrary quotas. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, now serving as Director of Colonial Integration, oversaw the complex process of determining which refugees could be successfully integrated into human society. The criteria were straightforward, but strictly enforced. Refugees had to demonstrate useful skills, accept human laws and customs, and commit to contributing positively to their new communities. Those who met these requirements found themselves welcomed into a civilization that valued merit over ancestry and innovation over tradition. "We processed 15,000 refugee applications last month," Emma reported to the Colonial Council. "Approval rate was 63%, which is consistent with our standards. The rejected applications were mostly from individuals who expected to maintain their former social status without contributing equivalent value to human society. The refugee program was having an unexpected effect on human development. Many of the aliens who qualified for integration brought knowledge and perspectives that enhanced human capabilities in ways that had never been possible under the old Council system. Alien scientists contributed to research projects that were advancing human technology at an unprecedented pace. Engineers from species with different evolutionary backgrounds provided insights that solved problems human researchers had been struggling with for years. But perhaps the most important contribution was philosophical. The aliens who chose to join human civilization did so because they believed in human values of equality, merit-based advancement, and individual responsibility. Their presence validated humanity's decision to reject the Council's hierarchical system and build something better. Commander Alex Carter, now overseeing human expansion into the Galactic Rim territories, received regular reports about the continuing collapse of Council space. The numbers were staggering in their scale and tragic in their implications. 40% of Council territory was now under hegemony control. The Void Swarm had consumed 12 star systems and showed no signs of slowing down. Piracy had reached levels that made interstellar commerce impossible in large areas of what had once been peaceful space. The latest intelligence suggests that the Council government itself may collapse within the next 6 months, reported his intelligence chief. Several member species are withdrawing from the alliance and trying to negotiate separate peace treaties with the hegemony. Alex nodded, making notes on his tactical display. The information was valuable for human strategic planning, but it also carried a weight of historical significance. They were witnessing the end of the oldest continuous government in galactic history, a civilization that had endured for thousands of years before finally falling to its own arrogance and incompetence. The irony was not lost on any human observer. The Council had collapsed not because of external conquest or natural disaster, but because they had driven away the one species that could have saved them. The same leaders who had spent years explaining why humans were too primitive and violent to be trusted with authority had ultimately proven incapable of maintaining the civilization their ancestors had built. Fleet Admiral Kate Sullivan, reviewing the situation from her headquarters on Earth, reflected on the path that had brought humanity to this point. 3 years ago, humans had been supplicants seeking acceptance from alien masters. Today, they were the dominant military and technological power in their region of the galaxy, with other species seeking to join their civilization rather than compete with it. The transformation had not come without costs. Human expansion had required enormous investments in ships, equipment, and personnel. The refugee crisis was straining resources even as it provided new talent and perspectives. Most importantly, humanity was having to develop new institutions and policies for governing a multi-species civilization while maintaining the values that had made their society attractive to begin with. But the costs were manageable compared to the benefits. Human territory was expanding rapidly as new worlds were discovered and colonized. Trade networks were developing that connected human colonies with independent systems that had chosen to align themselves with human civilization rather than the failing Council. Most importantly, humans were building a society based on principles of merit, innovation, and mutual respect that was attracting the best minds from across the galaxy. The final vindication of humanity's choice came in the form of a message from scientist Vel Thara, who had become one of the most respected researchers in human space. Her analysis of the galactic situation had reached a conclusion that was both obvious and profound. Humanity's withdrawal from Council space had not caused the current chaos. It had simply revealed chaos that had always existed, held back only by human sacrifice and competence. We were never the problem, Jake mused to himself as he read Vel Thara's report. We were the solution they refused to acknowledge. The galaxy was learning new lessons about power and responsibility, about the difference between governing and leading, about the consequences of taking essential services for granted. The Council had wanted to keep humans as subordinates, useful, for dangerous work, but not worthy of real authority. Instead, they had created their own successors, a civilization that embodied everything the Council claimed to value but had failed to practice. As human ships continued their expansion into Unexplored space and human colonies grew into thriving worlds. The galaxy was witnessing something unprecedented. Not just the rise of a new power, but the emergence of a new model for interstellar civilization, one based on merit rather than ancestry, innovation rather than tradition, and mutual respect rather than hierarchical dominance. The remnants of the Galactic Council would eventually fall completely, either to the hegemony, the void swarm, or simple internal collapse. When that happened, the survivors would face a choice. They could try to rebuild the old system that had failed so catastrophically, or they could seek to join the new civilization that humanity was building in the spaces between the stars. For those wise enough to choose the latter option, humanity would be waiting with the same offer they had always made. Prove your worth through your actions, accept responsibility for your choices, and help build something better than what came before. It was the same offer the Council had rejected 3 years ago,